to Wordsmith Academy. We are excited to announce our free webinar series that is going to run throughout this year. Our first guest is Mark Gottlieb from the Trident Media Group, who is a industry-leading literature agent. He's one of our instructors. He taught one of our first classes with Wordsmith back in 2020, and he's rejoining us again this year to teach some classes centered around query letter writing and hook writing. So be sure to check out his scheduled class coming up on April 9th. But here you can see the full interview with him, where we got to sit down and have a chat about what got him into being a literary agent in the first place and the kind of things he's looking for in today's literary world. Enjoy. Okay, so to get started, Mark, I'd love to hear a little bit more about where you started, not so much as a literary agent, but like where you grew up and how you got interested in this particular industry.
I think probably unlike most people who kind of find their way into book publishing as this sort of accidental profession, that's how a lot of people tend to know book publishing. People sort of stumble out of the humanities and into publishing. Although that's been changing in recent years, with a lot more graduate programs, undergraduate programs offering, studies in book publishing. But when I went to school, there weren't a lot of, schools doing all of that. I grew up in a very literary family. Both my parents worked in book publishing. My mom did contracts for various publishers for a number of years. So she worked in their business affairs department, kind of like a paralegal would. And then, my dad owns a literary agency where I work. So it's a family business pretty much. And, even before them, my grandparents, one was a poet, the other was an actor. My family's always kind of been in the arts in one way or another. So I would say, unlike most people who they kind of don't even dream of going into book publishing as a career, they just don't think it's possible, right? To sort of work in an entertainment field or something like that. I knew that's what I wanted to do from an early age. So I sought out, a degree in publishing from Emerson in Boston.
And when you went to school for this, like what kind of things do you learn as far as that kind of education is concerned? Like, and how did that influence you as far as kind of what avenue you wanted to take as a literary agent? Because I know you didn't go straight into agenting, right? You were in
I worked at Penguin Books for a while in production, art and production, fresh out of school. So that was before Penguin and Random House merged. So it was a different company at the time. But when I was in school, actually the curriculum was very limited because it was the second year the school had been offering an undergraduate degree in book publishing. And they were one of only two schools in the country doing that at the time. It was the better of the two schools. That's why I chose, rather than I could have gone and studied comparative literature at Columbia University or Harvard, and then I would graduate, and then what would I know about the book business? It's one of the reasons why publishing is probably so weird, or why it's the way it is. It's a bunch of English majors trying to make sense of a business, right? But when I was in school, the curriculum was really limited, and what the college decided to do was they brought in a lot of faculty from nearby in Boston, people who worked at publishing houses, and also taught as adjunct professors and things like that. So it was great because my book marketing professor worked for Houghton Mifflin Harcourt doing all their marketing and publicity. She now actually runs the Independent Booksellers Association. I think for a time she was one of the people running shelf awareness at publication. Or my book editing professor, he was an editor at a publishing house. So in a way, it was like you were learning from people who could teach you the real applications of all of this. Whereas, my other kinds of professors at the university, because, I did other kind of curriculum, they were people who were kind of they were in one way or another kind of like still in academia, stuck in academia in a way, and hadn't lived a lot of this stuff. They were teaching it, but they didn't necessarily work in that field. So yeah, it was an interesting way to come up.
Learning from people who are actually in the industry, I mean, I can only compare it to my own education, where I went to film school, and everybody they brought in was people that worked in the industry. That's all they had. There was no teacher that just taught how to do film. It was all people in the industry. It kind of must have been valuable to be able to get that. But how did you, when you graduated, how did you go about finding work in the industry to get into the area? And did you have a specific idea as to what you wanted to do?
Well, I was very well connected.
Yeah, I guess so, because that makes sense.
When I graduated, I actually went on a bunch of different interviews. I had a job offer to work in editorial and children's books, but I didn't think I wanted to do that at the time. I hadn't sort of kind of rediscovered my love of children's literature. And then there was that, obviously, the working in production at Penguin, but also I had gone out west and I had interviewed at a lot of major agencies out there and some publications. I interviewed at Variety magazine, and I had interviewed at CAA and UTA, and I actually had a job offer from CAA to work in their script library, which basically, they had a database, a physical database of all their scripts, their screenplays. And so they wanted someone like in that department with that kind of experience, a background in books, and it wouldn't even pay the groceries. And I felt like I would be really far away from books in a way. I mean, I'd still be working with the written word, but I really wanted to be closer to books. So I had gone for the job, at Penguin. And from there, it was an exciting time to be at a publisher because ebooks were just catching on. Amazon was already on the scene. They were already on their second or third generation e-reader at that point. And the publishers were in trouble because of it. They had given so many ebooks away to publishers, to Amazon, excuse me. And a lot of printing plants were closing as a result. It was kind of a scary time. And publishers kind of had to kind of wrap their heads around ebooks and how to, correctly market and promote them and window them in such a way that it didn't cannibalize their own business. So it was kind of this wild time to be at a publishing house. And then at the same time, Penguin had dropped their academic line. They have this Pearson Penguin, their textbook line kind of split off with Penguin. The company changed leadership. This is still way before they were going to merge with Random House, but all this was going on, and I just felt compelled to kind of move toward my family business and like position the agency where I now work, for the future. And I think it was the right time. It was an exciting time to do that. I started in foreign rights there, which is a great kind of, let's say, boot camp at the agency for learning all the titles and seeing the books, in translation.
How did you transition into being a literary agent out of foreign rights?
So that was kind of a funny story, actually. At the time, so our chairman, my dad, he had an assistant who went to go work for a competitor of ours, William Morris Endeavor, where he actually used to run the book department there. And so it was kind of this sore spot of contention that his assistant would be going over there. And he basically said to her, we'll give you 2 weeks pay, but you have 2 hours to put your things in a box and get out, because he didn't want her stealing any information from the company and bringing it to a competitor. And he turned to me and he said, would you like to help cover my desk? I need someone to cover my desk, and I don't have 2 weeks to find someone. I have 2 hours to find someone. And I said, no, I definitely don't want to do it. I said, I don't want, to work that closely with you or know that side of you. Uh, he said, that's nice. You want to think about it, but, come to work tomorrow and like, this is what you're going to be doing. And I basically was just thrown into it. I didn't have anyone to give me like formal training or anything. It was like a lot of detective work, like these cryptic emails and things, and like piecing it all together and watching it unfold before my eyes. And it all did come together rather nicely, but yeah, it was a pretty wild experience because, there were like multi-million-dollar book deals on the line, and, you're connecting people and their calls and what have you. And, you just don't want to drop the ball because there's a lot of money on the line, or you want to make sure the client gets like a dozen of the yellow roses, right? When she hits the New York Times list, like was actually like a note in the like assistant's Bible or whatever. There were all these little eccentricities and things you had to know from like people who had spent decades in like working together. Like you had to know how they interacted in their correspondences. And yeah, so it was an interesting way to learn, and you got to sort of see everything through those eyes for a while. And then after that, I transitioned into doing audiobooks for the company. So I ran the audiobook department for a time. Basically, wherever there were deals where audiobook rights were retained, for the author, we helped find an independent audio publisher, a separate audio publication. And for a while, that was a very good business. But then publishers started insisting on having, audio rights, basically just as an additional format to a book, like, when the publishers insist on having, the print rights or the ebook rights. So there wasn't a lot for like the audio people that came after me at the company to do. Now, most of that work is like a lot of backlist audio titles or very rare circumstances where authors keep their audio rights. And then I just started from there, building a client list of my own, which is what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. I mean, you went through like a trial by fire to get to where you are, which is kind of interesting. Even though like it's a family business, you still had to go through the particular avenues to get to where you're at.
Well, it was particularly difficult because, with people we don't know, so like as our friends or family, like people we work with, like it's like we're constantly walking on eggshells. Whereas when it's someone who has that level of comfort with you, like they're going to ask whatever, they don't care. And so in a way it's good, in a way it's bad, but as with everything, there are pluses and minuses. It was interesting to see like just how much someone was trusted in that position. Like one time he called me into his office and he said, can you read this manuscript? And so I read it and he said, do you like it or not? And I started to tell him about the manuscript and he said, no, just yes or no. Do you like it or not? I said, yes. He said, okay, great. I'll represent it and I'll sell it. And he sold it to a publisher, like in a 3-book deal or something. It was like a debut for this author. He was so happy. He lived in Japan. He flew to the US to meet with, everyone at the company. And I thought, wow, all I did was just say like, yeah, I liked reading this thing. And then it got sold. I thought there was more to it than that. But anyway, there are lots of interesting stories along the way. Lots of interesting folks have come through the office, and yeah, it's been a good journey so far.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen all the different sides of working with you, working with other agents. Like I've seen all the different sides of publishing, and it does seem to be different. I mean, no one seems to get their start as an author the same way twice. It's always through this avenue or that avenue, or through this story or that story. As a literary agent, I mean, especially over the last 2 years, where everything has been very different than what we've been used to, how has the pandemic affected the publishing industry, you as a literary agent, authors in general?
It's interesting. I mean, there was an article I wrote about it recently for, well, I talked about it in a few places, so it's hard to remember, but Publishers Weekly publishes a like kind of a yearly almanac of the publishing industry. And they asked me to do their chapter on literary agents and just talk about what's going on in the industry. And so obviously a big part of that was like COVID and its aftermath. And basically what's gone on since 2020 was, a lot of interesting things have happened, some good, some bad. Early on, what happened was there was a huge uptick in reading because people were suddenly at home. They had all this time on their hands. There was this big increase in people wanting to read the classics. Like suddenly they had time to read Moby Dick, or suddenly they had time to read War and Peace. And initially they were buying these books in paperback and reading them. And then what happened was really interesting. The supply chain issues hit through COVID. And what happened was suddenly people realized, well, the stores aren't open, and Amazon has prioritized certain orders. Like they say the essential items are not books, but instead food and medicine and water. And yeah, there were people like James Patterson and some other like authors and people in publishing who came along and said, books are essential too. And yeah, I love books, but also like when people are dying, like, they need food and water and medicine. And so what happened was books were delayed, and people, in order to get books more instantaneously, turned to audiobooks and ebooks. And so there was a big uptick in digital audio and ebooks. And that kind of leveled off eventually, as things got a little bit more back on track. But for a while, because so many bookstores were closed and Barnes & Noble was closing locations and other stores were going out of business, publishers were operating at very limited capacity. And they started changing the way they paid authors. So a lot of authors of fiction, for instance, can sometimes get paid half on signing a contract, the second half when they deliver a manuscript to a publisher. But what happened was publishers wanted to kind of space out the payments in order to help with their own cash flow issues. So instead, publisher would say, well, we'll pay you a quarter on signing. We'll pay you a quarter when the manuscript delivers. We'll pay you a quarter when the hardcover publishes, and then we'll pay you another quarter when the paperback publishes. So it wasn't like they were paying authors less money necessarily, but they were kind of windowing things out. A lot of companies initially were letting go of staff, but then they got the PPE loan. They were able to hold on to people. What also happened was, I don't think publishers' buying habits changed too much. Although early on in the pandemic, a lot of our competitors said, well, we're just going to cease submitting books to publishers until this whole thing blows over, not knowing this is going to last years. It's the event and its aftermath, right? So it kind of created a huge opportunity for us because we're going to go about this like it's business as usual, even though we were working from home like everyone else. And at the start of the pandemic, I had never been so busy. I probably closed 4 book deals around then. And they were 2 or 3 of them were 6-figure book deals. But, what also happened in the wake of all this too is, it changed the culture of publishing in a lot of ways. Publishing was for a very long time a very gentlemanly business where Someone could say, I'm going to make you an offer on the phone. And then like it would come in over the fax machine. I wasn't like around to experience that, but or it was like a 4 cocktail lunch thing. Now people aren't getting lunch in person. There aren't as many in-person meetings. Editors are harder to get a hold of because they're not really at their desks anymore. Like if you call them, you're going to get their voicemail, right? If you email them, they might be at their desk or they might be out like walking the dog because they're at home. So there's been a lot of that too, which kind of presents its own set of challenges because I think companies are learning their way around this transition back into the office.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense considering, I mean, even as an author, obviously we saw a lot of stuff shift over the course or the beginning of COVID and then just kind of extended from there. And like you said, everybody, like you said about your competitors, a lot of people just kind of figured, we'll just wait for it to stop. We'll wait for everything to go back to normal. And nothing has really gone back to normal at this point. But how, I guess today, how does it impact how you're accepting new authors, how you're building your client list? Has it been any shift to that, or is it business as usual?
I mean, a lot of the bookstores have come back and like reopened, and people are buying books both online and in stores again. I don't know if it's really changed the way we go about getting clients, except that a lot of these events have gone like this, like we're doing on Zoom. So you used to have a lot of workshops and conferences that were in person, and you could go and fortuitous things would happen, right place, right time type of thing. And now it's sort of all just gone online, which has also, inadvertently changed like the whole author book tour thing. I mean, not very many authors do book tours, especially in-person ones or multi-city ones. I would say like a select group of authors do. But now for a while anyway, there was a lot less of it. Now there's kind of a hybrid of the two, but you couldn't really walk into a bookstore and like read your book to an audience and do a Q&A after for a while there. So it's sort of changed the way that authors and publishers promote things, less in-person stuff than there used to be.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I can't remember the last time I did a book signing. It's been easy 3 years, I think, since I've actually been into a bookstore to do that kind of thing, because everyone was so scared to go out. As far as the querying process is concerned for you as a literature agent, because you teach, one of the classes that you teach for us is query writing or query and writing. What is the weight that's laid upon that particular process?
Well, I think the query letter is really important because it's really everyone's first window into you and your work. It's telling us about your relevant writing experience and credentials, but it's also telling us about sort of the plot of your book a little bit, like some of the exciting details of the book, but it's also a showcasing of your writing. If you think about it, if it's a well-written letter, if the book sounds interesting, if you have a great background as a writer, then an agent or editor will feel more compelled to want to read your manuscript and hopefully work with you. And then assuming, let's say, the stars begin to align and, someone offers you representation or an editor's working with you or whatever, your query letter, chances are that gets reworked into a pitch to publishers. And then let's say the publisher buys your book, then that same query letter, which got reworked into a pitch to publishers, becomes the jacket copy on the back cover of the book. So if you think about it, the query letter is kind of like the beginning of everything. Obviously, it's the work itself, right? The manuscript is like what's so important, but it's your storefront and it's the window into everything. And basically, with the end user, with the customer, it's that book in their hands. They're essentially reading that jacket copy, that cover copy description. It's your it's your writing, it's your description. The publisher helps with it. They sometimes write it for authors, but they'll show it to an author, right, and get their input, or the author might write it, right? So either way, it's gonna have the author's name on it, so they're gonna want to have some kind of input about it. So it's really important. It's why I go back to it in every kind of like workshop or conference I do, because it's a skill that authors need.
That is all valuable information, I think, for people who are either already authors to understand the business better, or people who are actually looking to get representation. I think that's all very very interesting. So thank you for that. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Be sure to check out wordsmithacademy.com for all the other free webinars that we have coming up, including our scheduled live classes with a variety of different instructors. So be sure to check all that out at wordsmithacademy.com. Get your story straight.